To begin with, I must say that I came from the poorest family on earth. At least that was the way I felt when I was a little boy. As a boy I went barefoot most of the time. Never did I receive anything at Christmas time. I believed in Santa Claus and hung my stocking up every Christmas, but never ever found an apple. All I would get on Christmas was being awakened and having my father try to give me a glass of whiskey, which I used to refuse. It was too strong. One night when Elle was about 8 years old, my brother and I were awakened about 1 o'clock in the morning. What woke us was my mother and father were having a fight. It was about a dispossess. At this time the rent was about $7 a month. My brother told me to dress up. He was 3 years older than I, so I dressed up and he took me on Park Avenue around 114th Street. By this time it was about 2:30 in the morning, so we broke into a store. I don't remember what kind of store, but all I know we took 2 bags of fairy soap. We found the bags in or around the cellar as page 1 returned to top 2, this being a market neighborhood. Potato bags were common. At this time fairy soap was 5c a bar. We went from house to house and sold the soap for 2 bars for 5c. When we knocked at the apartment doors, most of the people knew us. Well, I don't remember how much we made, but I do remember it helped pay 1 month's rent. It was around this time that I earned the name of Joe Cargo. I started to build my own toys. I would get a soap box, put an axle on the end of the box, and I would use 2 wheels from a baby carriage and put one on each end of the axles, and put a screw on each wheel to keep the wheels tight. Then I would use a 2x4 about 5 feet long and put 2 more wheels in front and put a bolt in the middle and put a rope on each end of the front wheels so that I could steer the wagon left or right. I would put one leg in the wagon, sort of kneel in the box of the wagon, and I would push with my left leg to the ground, holding the rope in each hand at the same time with my hands on the box. Most of the time I would go at 116th Street and Park Avenue because it had a steep hill. I would go on top of the hill and come down full speed. If any car or truck was passing by, return to top 3 at the time I was coming down, well, the only thing I could do was to try and go either left or right, and then I might turn over. It's a good thing that at this time there wasn't many cars. Well, anyway, as long as I had a wagon on my hands and it could carry a pretty good load, I started to go for junk with the wagon. By junk I mean brass, rags, iron and things like that. I would go on the west side and do down to the basement apartments and ask the sup if he wanted to get rid of any junk. I started to earn about $3 or $4 a day. I started to get so much junk that I had to use a bigger and stronger wagon. Instead of baby carriage wheels I started to use wheelbarrow wheels. They were very strong and I could put any amount of weight on the wagon. So I started to pick up a lot of iron as iron started to go up as there was talk about war. Of course I'm talking about the First World War. Then there was the problem of going to school. Since I built heavy wagons I started to make about $7 to $9 a day, so I used to stay away from school sometimes. I stood away as long as 30 to 40 days just to make money, and I used to give it all home. Returned to top 4 one time I took my kid sister along with me, and this day that I took my sister along was on a Saturday. There was no school on Saturday, but some truant officer happened to spot us on the west side and saw us with a load of iron and rags and everything I could lay my hands on, so he pulled us in and we were brought down to the Aid Society, which was on 23rd Street, New York City, at this time. Well, they let her go home right away and they kept me about 3 or 4 weeks. So now they were very strict with me, as at this time I used to go to PS 172 as it was on the same block I used to live. I must say, since I was going out for junk we used to eat better. Well, for a couple of years I helped make all kinds of wagons. I even made them for other boys. When I was about 11 years old I went to the NY Catholic Protectory for throwing a stone at the teacher. I didn't mean to hit her. I meant to scare her, but I happened to hit her in the eye. I felt real bad about it, so I went away for 2 years. I was released from the NYCP and I went right back for another 2 years. This time it was for not going to school, now the second time. Returned to top 5 I was there at NYCP in what we called the Aloysius Yard. Let me explain how many yards there were in the NYCP. The smallest yard was called the Infants, the second yard was the Sacred Heart, the third was Aloysius, the fourth yard was St. Joseph, and the last and biggest yard was St. Patrick. Now I made up my mind to be a good boy. I started to keep what the brothers called a state of grace. Meaning if a boy received his communion for 9 months without going to confession, that meant that the boy didn't do anything wrong in those 9 months. I must say that it was hard to keep, but I kept it, but I took plenty abuse. In other words, I was being pushed around whenever we were in the yard. The boys will call anyone who tried to keep a state of grace a sissy. Well, after I kept a state of grace I got tired of being abused, so one Sunday we came out of the mess hall and I went to do some exercise when one boy came over and tried to chase me away. I got mad and I hit him so hard that he went down. In the meantime the brother saw it. His name was Bro. Lawrence. Well, he blew the whistle, and when the whistle blows you must stand right where you are. That is the rules. Return to top 6. So he, the boy, I hit remained on the floor. Well, I must say I got punished. I had to put my both hands out and he would swing, and if I pulled my hands in that meant double. They used a bamboo stick with tape around it to hit us boys in the CP. Well, I must say that I was often running from then on. I was ganged up and that meant plenty of trouble. Whenever someone of the gang got in trouble it meant trouble for me. So I became one of the rough boys at the NYCP. But as I go on with this story I will explain time and again how I was saved in the underworld life. That right now I believe that this state of grace helped me along in the life, at least I believe it, as you will see as I go on, how many times I was saved by near luck. I must say that every time I missed being hurt I thought of the state of grace. I can't confide to anyone but I think by myself. As I said, as I write I will explain each time that I got saved from being murdered. Well, let me tell you what the CP did to most of us boys. If you went to the CP and you were naive, you can bet that 90% of the boys that came out of there were pretty tough. When I was in the small yard of the NYCP, as I explained, there were 5 different return to top 6A yards in the small yard. I don't remember where I worked, as I do remember what sports I used to play. I used to play handball, but we played a different style in the Catholic Protectory. We only played 6 points and sometimes the game lasted 1.5 hours. There would be a line on the handball court, say about 5 feet off the ground by the handball court, I mean the wall. Of course there will be a line on the right and a line on the left, and then when one of the players made 5 points he would go about 200 feet in front of the court and the other player will throw the ball to the player in, say we call it outfield, and the player would hit the ball with his hands right or left, whichever way he was used to playing, and he must hit the handball wall above the white line. Of course there would be also a line on the right and left of the wall. The balls we played with were very lively and not too many times did the player send the ball right to the wall. That's why I say that sometimes the game lasted about 1.5 hours. Then in the summer I used to play baseball. I started out as a catcher, but I was a very poor hitter, because I used to try and kill the ball. The brother would always give me hell for swinging so hard. He used to return to top 6B. Tell me don't try and kill the ball. But to tell the truth I didn't understand him. I guess I was too young. There used to be 6 classes and each class had a ball team, and there was another team that used to play against the other yards, like say, St. Joseph will play against St. Patrick and so on. In the small yard I wasn't on the main team, but when I went to the St. Joseph yard I made the main team. In the St. Joseph yard there was 2 main teams, one was called the Stars and the other called the Pearls. I was on the Pearls. I was the star catcher, but although I improved a little I still didn't hit too good. We used to play between ourselves, by that I mean the Pearls and the Stars will play all summer, and at the end of the summer the winner will win tubs of ice cream. And it will be up to the winning team whether we get any or not, but they used to give the losing team some. Then in the winter time I used to play on the basketball team. In other words, I played all kind of sports. Believe me, that was the wisest thing to do, because the weather used to be real cold in those days, especially at that time there wasn't any houses around those grounds. The toilets used to be in the yard under a shed and wide open, only a sliding door. For our privacy, and besides the seats would be all frozen. So I used to wait until we went to the dormitory. By the time we got back to the dormitory it would be forgotten. Later on in years I felt the effects of this doing in my older days. In fact, until right now I still feel the effects of those younger days. In other words, I've gotten to be constipated, ever since. Now we used to receive visits once a month and we were allowed to receive a package of fruit candy and things like that. Then my people would leave $1 or $2 and that would go on our credit in the candy store that the brothers had in the yard. In fact, there was one candy store in every yard and that would be opened once or twice a day. When we played handball we used to play for candy. There was some boys that used to smoke, but I never did. They would use part of the round shoelacing that they used to give us. I didn't learn very much in the Catholic Protectory, as to tell the truth all they taught us was the catechism. It was always pray and pray all the time. I don't mean to say that it wasn't right, but I figure they should have taught us something about life. To be truthful, all I knew about life was religion. Return to top 6D. Then when I got into the outside world I was very naive. Those kids in the Protectory were very evil-minded. Believe me, when we took a shower, God forbid if some of our body was exposed. You wouldn't hear the end of it. We used to put tights on before we went under the shower. I don't mean that the brothers were evil, it was the boys. The only movies we ever saw were still pictures, and believe me, we thought they were great. If we did anything wrong we would be put on penance, and that all there was penance and penance all the time. It wasn't hard to get into trouble, it was the easiest thing to do. Most of the time you yourself didn't know why you were put on penance. Now as far as the brothers were concerned, some were good and some were real bad. Take Brother Albal. Well, he was in charge of the tailor shop, and he would give you a certain amount of buttonholes to make, and I would do all my best so that he won't have anything to say, but no matter what I did it was no good. He would say, show me the buttonholes you made. Well, when he saw them he would hit you on top of your head with the tape stick, and believe me, it hurt awful. So what returned to top 6E happened. Brother Albal dies, so they put his body in display in the chapel. All the kids from the 5 yards had to view it. When it was my turn I almost fainted when I saw all the spit on Brother Albal's chest. So I spit at him too. What happened after the funeral? We all went on penance the whole 5 yards for about 2 weeks. Here is some of the penance. When we went in the yard we will stand in line with our hands on our heads, and when we went to the dormitory we had to stand in front of our beds the same way until 10 o'clock at night. That would be about 2 hours, and then when we went to the movies we had to do the same thing. They didn't take any of our food away. Well, the kids felt that no matter what the price was to spit at Brother Albal it was worth it. So you can imagine how bad he must have been. He was close to 80 when he died. But I must say one thing, no matter how bad it was I did become very religious. I will explain what I mean later on. Now we had the best band of all. Let's say, St. Joseph School, St. John School and so on. Well, it amounted to about 100 bands. Once a year they would take about 100 boys and the band down to see the circus at Madison Square Garden, and they would hold a contest of all the bands. This year, to my surprise, I was one of the boys that went. We had on a uniform and they were very pretty. It was wonderful. We went down by subway. I don't remember which one, but it was a subway. We had the time of our lives. No one ran away. I guess I'll finish now talking about the Catholic Protectory. Only say that Catholic Protectory won. God forbid if they didn't win, it would have meant more penance. I don't remember what year it was, but I went and visited up there and the brother brought me all over the place, and that is all. I could say more, but at best I don't. Let me explain the neighborhood of East Harlem as a kid before and after I came home from the New York Catholic Protectory, especially the first time I came home. First I'll explain how we stood on the corner at First Avenue and waited for a wagon or a truck that the rear doors were not locked from top to bottom, for instance a grocery truck or wagon. We would jump on the rear of the truck or wagon and lift anything we can grab. Say like a tub of butter or a small box of cheese or anything. Now the big guys of the block would buy it from us. When I say us I mean us kids. They would tell us if we did not sell to them we could not steal along the avenue. We didn't care so long as we made some money so we can have a few dollars in our pocket. One of the older fellows would fit in my story later on. His name was Crazy Chuck. He was the most feared guy in the block. Of course I'm talking about 108th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue, the same block as I talked about in the early part of this story, the murder stable. One time some kid and I stole some suits from a second-hand store and we put the suits in the hallway of one of the apartments in 108th Street. As we were coming down the block with another load we caught one of the older fellows stealing our second-hand suits. Well, this was too much. I picked up a brick and I told him, put those suits down or I'll hit you on the head. He said he took them as he did not know who they belonged to, so I said they belonged to us. See, we got more. So he said that he would buy them from us. I said okay, that's different. Now when we had a few dollars, especially if it was in the summer, we will go to 96th Street and 1st Avenue where there was a boat there that had a swimming pool. We didn't go there too often because that neighborhood was rough. Sometimes they will grab us being we came from a different neighborhood. They will search us and take everything we had in our pockets. This caused a fight as we will get the rest of the boys and we will go back and we would have stones, bats or iron bars and whatever we can get our hands on. Sometimes we caught them and sometimes we didn't. It got to be that way with all the blocks, and we started to fight different blocks, and when we were alone we had to get from one block to another. We will go through the cellars and come out on the next block and then cross the street, and so the same thing. For instance, if I wanted to go from 108th Street to 106th Street, that was what I had to do. We weren't safe anymore no matter where we were, even when we will be in the pool room or in the cafe. We always had someone watching out for us. Now when the First World War was on we started to have block parties. We used to go around and make a collection and we will get a neighborhood band and we will have real good fun. In those days block parties were common. We will have nothing but clean fun. Sometimes I did go out with some of the girls on 108th Street, but all we would do was go to Central Park if it was in the summer. We will rent a rowboat, or if it was in the winter we will go to a movie. But I did not go with any girls steady. And I can say only that it happened once or twice that I went anywhere with neighborhood girls. Before I stop writing about when I was a boy, I want to say that I learned all the card games there was, as I did waste a lot of time in these cafes. Most of the time that I spent in these cafes will be between the hour of 9 to 12 at night. I forgot a few things as a kid, so I'll go back when I was going to school. Things were so bad at home. We were 6, 3 boys and 3 girls. I never got along with the older one and neither did I get along with the young one. My sisters, I got along only with one. She and the young boy are dead today. I'll talk about them one at a time. First, I want to talk about when I used to steal iron. I would get in one of those and rags and things of the like just to eat. Places like where they cut stones or burns coal yard or places like that, and I will take whatever iron or brass I could find and I would go to the junk shop and make 50 cents or $1 so that I might have some money to eat. One time at night, I and 2 more fellows were hungry. We saw sausages hanging in the window of a store of the kind which sells meat and groceries, and we had a bakery around the block that used to make bread all night, so we decided to break the window and get some sausage, and we would go down to the bakery and we will cook it. But when I broke the window, I stuck my hand in and opened the door. So the other fellow got a bushel and started to put groceries, sausage, nuts, and all kinds of things into the bushel. Then he finds a 5-gallon jug of wine, so he starts to drink. I didn't care for wine, so I didn't drink any. The first thing you know, he got drunk. He lived down by the East River, so we had to cross First Avenue to get to his house. He was married, so we were going up his house to have a feast, so I told him to let me go first, and when I cross First Avenue, I will wave him to come or not. So as I reached the corner, a cop was coming down the avenue, so I crossed, and when I got into the block and the cop couldn't see me, I warned him back, but he was so drunk from the wine that he paid no attention to me. As it was about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I heard every word. The cop asked him what was he carrying and he answered, "Mind your own business," then dropped the bushel and started to run. The cop shot him in the leg and he got arrested for burglary. I didn't come around the block for a couple of days as I was ashamed, as the people in the block were talking about these great boys that go out and rob sausages. So they started to call this guy the sausage thief, but they didn't know who the other 2 guys were that was with this guy. I made believe I didn't know anything. So you see what could happen to cheap crooks. That was the talk. They put $25 bail on this fellow and he was lucky he got a suspended sentence. I got to realize that the cheaper you steal, the quicker you can get into trouble, so that was a lesson that I never forgot. Then I remember that I used to go into an empty apartment and steal all the lead I could lay my hands on. Maybe I would break into a couple of apartments to make a few dollars. All this I'm talking about is to show what a struggle I had and how bad the neighborhood was. Nothing was safe. We used to steal the 50-gallon wine barrel on the people that used to make their own wine. We got $1 a gallon for the wine. All this I'm talking about is when we were kids. That's how we grew up. Sometimes I went on 2nd Avenue and I would break the little side window on a clothing store and I would steal a coat or 2 that were on display. One time we rented a furnished room for $10 a week, I and another fellow. So when the rent came up, we couldn't pay it, so we were walking on 3rd Avenue and we noticed a clothing store and the owner had his back turned, so I went in and took an armful of suits, which were about 10 suits. As we were walking down 112th Street towards 2nd Avenue, 2 cops saw us carrying the suits as they were walking toward our way. We dropped the suits and we started to run. I got caught and the other fellow got away. I got a suspended sentence on this rap. Everything I talk about these cheap burglaries is between the age of 8 to about 16 and a half. I'm writing everything I can remember. Of course, I could never remember everything because I certainly robbed a lot of stores, all kinds of stores. There was an oil store on the corner of 108th Street. I must have robbed it 3 times, and on 1st Avenue, 108th Street, there was a dry goods store. I robbed this store about 3 times. Most of these stores had bars, so I used to get the fire escape ladder from the building and put it behind the store window, and I would force the bars apart with a 2x4. I would take some cheap piece goods and then sell it to the women in the block. Anything to make a few dollars, but I would not fool around with any stick-up. I had too much sense for that kind of stuff. There was a pants store on 2nd Avenue. I was making a hole from one store to another through the wall when all of a sudden, I heard a tap coming from the pants store telling me to go away. I thought that was very nice of the guy. He could have called the cops instead. I don't know if he knew that it was me. So I went in there and bought a cheap pair of pants just to see if he would tell me anything. Sure enough, he told me about it. He was telling me about some fellows were trying to break in the other night. He said he could have called the cops, but he figured that it was some kids from the neighborhood. So I told him it was nice of him, and I told him that they won't try to rob him anymore, so we became good friends after that. And his daughter used to smile at me all the time, so I spread it around the neighborhood and told the burglars I knew not to try and rob that store. Besides, I told them that they lived in back of the store. I never used to go out with any of the girls around the block. I didn't intend to get married, so why bother? If I wanted to play, I knew where to go without getting married. Some of the girls used to tell my sister what a stuck-up I was. Not a stuck-up, it was just that I had a bad name as a burglar, so I was ashamed, not stuck up. And my sister used to tell me that I was crazy. This was the sister that I loved. Her and I were always good pals. In fact, she is the one who got arrested with me when we were kids on the west side, as I told in the early part of my story. Of course, they knew about me because I was already arrested and my name was in the papers even though I wasn't 18 yet. Around 1918, when I just got out of school, I and 3 others joined the army. We had gotten our uniforms and we were dressing up when it came the truant officer, and he recognized us and they kicked us out as he told them we had just gotten out of school. We had joined to go to Fort San Houston. Whatever we were going to do there I don't know, but I was only 15 years old. Maybe if they had accepted me things might have been different. So they told us to come back when we were of age, so I told him try and get me. I was disappointed. Aussie wanted to get away from everything. The war didn't last long since the time we tried to join, maybe about 6 months. At this time as a teenager I was hanging out in the cafe in the block. I didn't start hanging in pool rooms, not yet, I'll tell about that later. In this cafe we would hear lots of stories as most of the owners were old-timers and knew most of the gangsters of the old days. I knew most of the names of the gangsters of the old days. I don't care to mention them because I didn't like what they were doing. These are some of the rackets they were in. They would shake down the pushcart peddlers. No wonder my father used to pay $1 a week. He used to tell me that he was broke because of Sharky, the one who got killed in the cafe I told about in the early part of this story. Another racket they had was some kind of a game. Most of the time they were at LLLTH Street and First Avenue. It was some kind of a fish game. They would have 3 small boxes and the red fish would be attached to one of the small boxes and the guy would play with his hands, and when he stopped the player would have to guess and pick which box would have the fish. They had so many busters around no one knew whether they were players or busters, but anyway this was the racket they were killing themselves. At least this was one of the important ones. I didn't learn about the artichoke racket yet, but I will tell about it later. Now another racket that the boys didn't like was the women racket. If any of these old-timers would have survived when I got older I think that I would have given them a beating. But none survives, only 1 or 2 good ones. I'm talking about the mobs before our time. This will cover the years between say 1908 through 1919. Another racket they had was a shakedown on poor businessmen. If a businessman was known to have money, first they would write him a letter telling him that some time in his early life that he had raped a girl, and they would put an age on the girl, say that she was 8 or 10 years old. They would tell him that the girl had moved away but now she is back. After a few letters they would have someone contact him that knew him. This fellow would tell him the best thing to do would be to pay because he could not afford the scandal. Even if he couldn't remember, the guy would pay as he would worry about the family finding out. Just the rap alone was disgraceful, so 9 out of 10 will pay and then move away. I'll talk about how I found out about this racket later on, as I myself helped one of this kind of deal. After I became a member of Cosa Nostra. By writing this kind of information is to explain how the underworld from cheap doings and how they climbed to the times of today, and how the Americanized underworld and the Italian-born mobsters thought. The Americanized usually stole for their money, where the Italian-born, since he is a kid, he has racketeering on his mind. That's why I'm explaining the best way I can. The Americanized feels that he is taking a chance for his money, where a greaseball, Italian-born, wants to racketeer, even the Americanized crooks. I guess I explained myself the best way I can. I don't want anyone to think that I'm protecting myself as a good one. I'm only explaining why we do not get along with the greaseball. In our hearts we don't care for one another. When I came home the second time from the Catholic Protectory I went to PS 83. I don't remember the exact year I came home, but I'm sure it was between 1917 or 1918. I'm more sure that it was 1917. Well, anyway, my father got me a job with him. It was a job after I came from school. I think I was earning about 50 cents an hour. Sometimes I worked until 9 o'clock at night. It was a filthy job. It was what is known as the city dump. In other words, when the city wagons dump the garbage, we the workmen will sort out rags, bottles, brass, bones, paper, or anything that can be used. You can imagine how the dust and ashes got in our lungs. Then my job was changed. I was to carry the bushels full of junk. When I was finished with the bushels, then I will carry the used paper, which was put into mattress cloth, on my back. The reason why my job was changed was because I was young. It was dangerous because I had to cross from the scow to the dock, and they had a plank from the scow to the dock. Most of the workmen were old, so they would be slow in crossing from the scow to the dock. Besides, most of the men didn't know how to swim. When I was 15 years old I got my working papers and I got out of school. Now I had a full job on the dumps. I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I lasted about 1 year. I was returned to top 8 disgusted because I could never be anything for myself, as my father used to take the pay. I mean my pay. I'm sorry, I must say that he used to trust all week buying whiskey for himself, so at the end of the week he had to pay. So there used to be more fights at home. Now I must tell you how I lived. In my bedroom, which was a cold flat, no hot water, and the toilets in the hallway. We used to bring home wood and used coal that we got from the dumps. We packed it all in my bedroom. For sheets, my mother used old cement bags. They were sewed together and made sheets out of them. So you can imagine how rough they were. I was going out with a girl that lived across the street. She lived on the top floor, I lived on the ground floor, and we lived next to the famous murder stable at 108th Street, 1st and 2nd Avenue. She could look right in the house when the light was on, and when she told me that she saw me the night before going to bed, I used to get a heart failure because I felt guilty of the filthy house. I must say these things or the reader won't understand. As I was working about a year, as I said before, I went in a burglary up in the Bronx. Well, that was the first job I went on since I came home from the NYCP. I got arrested that night. We robbed some kind of a store. I don't even remember. All I know, when we were going up to the LA, policeman stopped us. I mean, the other fellow name was Buck. He found coins on us. They were wrapped and they had the store name on the wrapper, and we were held in small bond, and my people got me out within a couple of days. I don't remember what happened in this case, but I do know I did no time for it. I went back to work with my father for a couple of months. Then I remember I got my chauffeur license and I got a job driving a big sightseeing bus. That was during the summertime. This job lasted about 2 months. Then I got a job delivering furniture. On this job I was driving a small truck. This job lasted about a month because the regular driver came back as he was sick, and he was working for this furniture store for a long time. Then I got a job in a fur factory and I lasted 3 days as the job I had. Other workers were telling me that it was a job that if you don't be careful I will develop the con. TB, that's all I had to hear. I quit within 3 days.